Hello team, welcome to Low Code Campfire and happy Friday to everyone.
Hello Dale, hello Albert.
So Reza's connecting.
Hello Dale, hello Mark.
Whoa.
Hello Reza.
Hey there.
Oh man, still with the fancy background, I love it.
Oh, ha, let me kill it. Well, why not?
Why not?
It's still valid.
Absolutely. So let's see, we were just getting started. Low Code Campfire, July 16th. And welcome. Number 10, man, I can't believe we're 2.5 months already, but gathering to talk about low code and plant an app. Techniques, challenges, experiences. These are all recorded, so and we try to put chapters on them so that all the good content, like last week, is available as we continue on and need to reference it. Our agenda is we're going to just say hi and then dive into around the campfire. If you've got noise behind you, use a minute to take a minute to put yourself on mute. And we have this submit questions and topics. It's a Google form that if you have something that you'd like to talk about in this meeting, go ahead and just scan that code and submit it. Sometime if I get questions in advance, I'll do some research. Not that guarantees a good answer, but at least I'll have looked into it. Anybody who is new to our gathering today and want to say hi or otherwise say hi.
Hello everybody, it's Mark.
Hi. We'll put anyone on the spot, but glad that you're here. So let's see, I entitled this one, What's Next? Does anybody catch that reference, where that comes from? No West Wing fans? They always say, what's next when they're ready to move on. So I'm ready to move on. What's next? What do we got going on this week? There was one question that I spent some time on for Mark, talking about the difference between hidden fields and visible fields. And it's kind of an interesting difference. I'd be interested to know whether there's a reason for it on our side, so I can demonstrate that a little bit. Maybe that's a good spot to dive in. Mark, this was your question, and I'm going to jump over to it here and see if I can find it. Just to demonstrate it real quick, we've got two text box fields here that we store a value into with JavaScript. I've got one called TV1, one called HF1. And when I click the button, we store values into each one of them. And when I click the button, I can see the values. TV1 has the value and HF1 has the value. So it's proving that it works. When we go in to the design and change this to hidden data, hidden field custom value, save and refresh, we get a different response. So use the same button and it's still working, but when it's a hidden field, it doesn't store data the same way. And I've tried some other field types, and some do, some don't. There's the logic that triggers the save is apparently different down behind the scenes. So before we dig in and discuss it, I just wanted to show the button that I have going on it's being stored with JavaScript, and this was relative to Mark's question. I'll let him talk in a minute about what he was trying to accomplish, but we're using the val function to store the value in each of the two different fields, and then and we're getting a different result. So one, Mark, can you give us an overview of what you were trying to accomplish? And in that, you discovered that text box, if it was hidden through CSS, was a good workaround. And I was just wondering if there's any downside to that workaround that we need to be aware of.
Sure. What I was trying to do, I had a form and a static text box on it. And in the on open or on init of the form, I would fill the static text with a list of items. And the list had delete buttons at the far right of each item. The delete button had, I had some JavaScript on the form that would detect which delete button you were hitting. It would grab the ID, truncate off the text off of it, and then it would put the ID in the hidden field. And then there was a button on the on the form that would grab that value, and that would be the item that it would run a SQL procedure to delete. So I had to communicate from the static text using JavaScript to the form and store the value. And that's what I was trying to do. And you described it perfectly, that it works with CSS hidden field, but not with the with the field type of hidden.
Did you, either one of you, there's a setting in the form settings that says something about like submit hidden form fields?
Reza, you're
That
right.
checked.
Yeah. That could very well be the thing that makes it work.
I saw it there for a second, Dale, when you first started. I think it's towards the bottom.
Close to the bottom.
A little more, keep going. There, last one. That's how towards the bottom.
Well, I would love it if it's this simple. So here we go.
Yeah, I would love it too. You know, I've noticed this for quite a while that sometimes the hidden fields just plain didn't accept my values. And I haven't determined that this is the only time. But when I was writing to you, Dale, I figured out that, yeah, it was when I was trying to throw a value in with JavaScript.
Right.
So appreciate you handling it. And
Sure.
Reza, that's a great
So-
tip. I'm going to be experimenting with that.
So it didn't solve it. Oh, let me double check here, make sure I refreshed. But just so back to my multi-part question I threw at you, Mark, is doing it as a regular text box hidden through CSS. Is there any downside to that? Does that work for you as a workaround?
I can't think of a downside. You know, it's hidden off the form. People don't see it. I think if they looked harder and then investigated the page, I think they could find it, but I don't think I care.
Well, and even
That's
with
where I was.
hidden field custom value is going to be the same way. It's going to be on the form someplace if somebody investigated, and I think you'd be in the same circumstance as having done it through CSS. But I was just so I think the workaround makes sense, and so now the question becomes: you have to figure out that the fields don't work the same way, and so there's the time that you spend trying to say, well, I was trying to do something with a hidden field, couldn't make it work, made it work with the text field. So now what? Right. So I think that and I learned something. I guarantee I learned something new every time I talk to you guys. In this store via JavaScript, I hadn't seen this syntax before, where you're using the .val and passing in a value. Do you recall where you found that? I'm just saying, I don't know where.
Yeah, that's, you know, the way I operate, Dale.
Okay.
I know what I want to do, and I just Google it, you know, and you can find samples of script all over the place, and
Yeah.
Stack Overflow is my very best friend.
And you bumped into it and it worked, and so here we go.
Yeah, years ago now at this point.
Yeah.
Use it all the time.
So my guess is that somewhere down deep in our code, we treat hidden fields slightly different from text fields. And just, when I was playing with this, I went into our text fields and tried some different things, and you get a little bit of a variety of results. So, for example, if I set this as Trumbo wig instead, completely different field type, refresh, it also doesn't work, but a large text will. See, we're getting nothing here.
Without getting too into the technical weeds, I've also encountered such things, right, in my travels. And one of the things I found out is that there's a library or that's used called Angular.js, and it is not, it's got an extra layer to it. So even when you're saying like set this, there's an extra command you have to give on some of these that actually says like kind of bind and push it all the way through. What you're seeing on the screen isn't what's actually recognized by the, you can kind of see like value will look like it's empty, even though you're seeing it. And there's almost like so I think with like that Trumbo wig, there's a visual layer where you can work. But at the end of the day, that results in an actual like payload and value. And unless you use that, yes, that command, it's not gonna stick on some of these.
Right. So I would just, from my perspective, the fact that they're different is a little bit annoying. It's one of those things that will cause a developer to spend a little extra time trying to find a solution. And I don't know if that's something that, how important it is for us to take it up as a correction or a change, even if it's possible. But it's just interesting. We see the differences, and there is a good workaround.
Yeah, I definitely want to dig in on this one a little bit more and figure out what's happening here in the hidden field. In general, I mean, if we want them to be similar, right, and kind of, you don't have to maintain if I'm using this one, I do it this way. If I'm using this one, I do it this way. I know that ultimately we need to, there needs to be a new form and kind of a reboot. We're working on Grid right now. It kind of has same type of needs. And there's more modern libraries and things that are a little bit easier, faster, cleaner, secure to work with. And that's the ultimate solution. And a lot of this stuff should resolve then. But in the meantime, so I'm kind of trying to balance that, feeding the old world versus investing in the new. But definitely if things aren't behaving consistently, or it's causing people to waste time or have to maintain a list of hacks, then we'll take care of them.
I would put this in that category. It did cause me to waste quite a bit of time, but I found a workaround. I don't think I'm complaining anymore. But 2 cents.
Yep.
Could you also actually accomplish this by using the bind expression for the hidden field, where you set the value depending on what the TB1 changed, when it changes, that it also changes the HF1? Or I'm just not
sure. So
doing something different.
In his use case, he's just trying to run some JavaScript to detect what you put a JavaScript, you put a button out there in HTML, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of an edge case
to that question. I don't know.
But it would be interesting to know whether. Let's see.
So under the value, if you just put the value of
Yep, good to poke at this and know whether it works.
And that is the way I've seen this used a lot, that field used a lot. Now, if you have an initial value, by the way, and I think it says it in there somewhere in the documentation, I think the bind break, you can either do a bind or an initial value, like but once one of them set, the other one kind of I think the bind will no longer work if there was an initial value.
That's the way I've seen it working.
So JavaScript introduces, I mean, if when we do it interactively, we're getting the result. When we store it with JavaScript, it's not detecting it, and that's probably again back to the Angular bind and apply that you were talking about. So kind of a mixed result there, but it's a good question. Reza, you talk about, and I know this morning we're talking about the future a little bit and talking about a new form and a formless module at some point. And one of the things I wondered about in that context is that, so we would try to make that as seamless a transition as possible. So if we had an action stack, for example, is going to hopefully going to work exactly the same way, maybe with some known limitations. And I wonder, do you think the JavaScript kinds of things that we're doing, interacting with our current form, are likely to be the same way in the new form, or is that opening up something that might be different in the new form?
Yeah, the kind of JavaScript is a very loaded kind of term. So if it's the vanilla JavaScript or like jQuery, and as long as like jQuery is installed, and basically, yes, it should, right? Now, things like what you were showing with that binding there for Angular, if the newer version of Angular has a different command or something, I think it's like Angular 10 now. And so that might not work. But the way we've taken the approach on the grid, the listing, is that the backend is kind of staying the same, all those settings and things like that. And we're starting to port over the settings. I don't want to just pull everything over verbatim, because there's a lot of things that kind of don't make sense anymore, or have been replaced by other ways of doing things. Like we were just kind of looking at in Low Code Cafe. Now that you've got workflows that can act as tokens, I was really I was very protective of tokens, right? I mean, that's such a vital part of the system. And I was like, wait, we're not going to get rid of tokens just because, you know, the rest of the token builder. But I was a little hard pressed to think about more than a couple of examples of, why wouldn't you just use a workflow instead of going and building all this out, database tokens and all of this? A lot of that stuff was from a time when we didn't have these new things, right? And the new things are kind of a better, cleaner way to do it. And so I don't want to just port every single feature. In the past, there's been kind of premium type tickets and clients that have paid to have things put into the system, right? And either of those things really don't provide value anymore, or don't provide value to most people. And those clients are, you know, this was years ago type thing. I don't want to just drag all that along. And I think forms would be similar there, right? So we're going to kind of do it in phases of, hey, look, here's the main things we know you need. And then let you all in settings like this kind of be like, hey, you know what really does need to come over next is this one and this one and this one, you know, and then we'll get those like that. There's a pattern for it. And so we're doing it in a way where even the listing is not a complete brand new listing. They're doing some stuff with the code where it knows, am I in the new mode or the old mode? If I'm in the new mode, load the new libraries and render it the new way, right? So all the same settings from your grid are there. Nothing's changed. It's just you changed the UI rendering of it to go about it a different way. So so far from what I've seen, everything is held up like existing grid. It works this way with the old way, and hey, by golly, it works with the new way as well. So aim is that, yeah, this should all be kind of a lift and shift, we call that, right? And you should be transparent to people. Might notice like, hey, where's that feature or where's this feature? Okay, let's get them in. Otherwise, we'll wait a while to have total feature parity, you know? And like I said, a lot of this stuff, there's kind of an 80-20 rule here, you know? 20% of the features is what 80% of the people are using. Let's get those in first. And we're gonna cover most cases that way. Now you start getting into, okay, I'm doing some fancy things, or I got a weird situation here. I need that extra feature. That's why that one was created, you know?
Yep.
And so, Reza, while you're digging around and redoing a new template for the action grid, I'd just like to put in a plug that it would be my personal preference to not see the page numbers up in the URL bar if I wasn't using paging. You know, if I could opt out of paging and get that out of my URL, that would make me personally happy. So just
Okay.
keep that in the back of your mind.
Yeah, might even be something we can, that believe it or not has come up before. I've noticed too, like it's one of those when it rains it pours, but it's one of these things you never hear about it, and then someone mentions it totally unrelated. Like the next day, it's like I'll come across it from someone else, and this came up last week actually. Yeah, it is kind of ugly up there and can cause other problems, right? Where your URLs are getting too long and stuff like that. So I think there's something we can do, and there might even be a workaround. I'll jog my memory, and if I remember during this session, I'll let you know. But I think there's a way to disable that. Otherwise, yeah, we can get it has been requested, and we can do a setting that says don't put that stuff up there because I'm not using it.
That's great to hear. I have subtracted it with jQuery before. I've had mixed results. I think it worked most of the time, but then sometimes it screwed something else up, like the back, going back in the URL or going forward. So I'm great. I'm happy that you're looking at it. If you don't mind, can I ask Reza, can I ask you another question?
Sure, please.
Sure. It was about what you were doing on Wednesday in the Low Code Cafe. I noticed that you had a token that displayed a list of names, and you put that in a row. Now, I was trying to do that this week, and if I'm remembering correctly, I couldn't do it because you were doing it with the new token. I'm sorry, workflow as a token. Is that true?
No, technically you can do that with any token. So if let's say like a database token, right? Where you're saying, I'm going to pass you an ID in, and you're going to go look up some other related value, right? And then give it back to me. You should be able to access that on every iteration, I guess is the right way to think about when a grid is loading, the way, just like the form has a set of like pre-init and init, and it's got a sequence that it kind of loads itself up in. Grid is the same way, and obviously the first thing it does is it goes and hits the main data source for it and gets the records. But then as it goes to build out the grid, the list, it's going to loop. And on every single loop, if you put a token in there, it will execute that token independently, meaning that, yeah, if it's the same value every time, a static type thing, it's going to repeat that. But if you're passing in a parameter, it will go and execute the token separately and give its result back. So that should work. Even with the one I was doing, I had a little issue where at first it wasn't, and I had found that my parameter wasn't correct or getting passed in correctly. And I kind of one of those jiggle the wires, and then lo and behold, probably 5 minutes before the cafe, to be honest, like it started working, and I was like, phew. But it was just a syntax error on my part. But that's been a long-standing thing for sure. I've used that technique a lot of times. It just was a lot easier to do with the workflow.
If you don't mind, I need to understand that a little bit better, because I was talking about putting a list of names into one token, and one token returned a list of names. And when I tried it, I get the top name only. I only get one result. So how did you get it?
It was a database token?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you do a database token, and Dale, would you mind maybe pulling up that interface of tokens, and we can kind of have a visual to go
Are
here.
you concatenating the rows with a break in between? Is that what you're doing, or something else?
You were just getting one line, so you were getting all the names, not just the first record.
No, I only got the first name. Like as a result of the token, if I ran the SQL in the in Microsoft, then I got all the names as individual rows.
Yeah. So what database tokens do by default is they give you back the first row.
I remember that.
And so then you need to do a second token like a razor and basically loop over. You do have available to you the whole, it really does return them all, but the value that comes back when you're using the token is just one. So you would need to go into like razor and loop over them and build up your list. Now the workflow is doing that for me in an execute actions, which you don't have available in tokens. You have razor basically is the only way you can loop over records.
Right, that's the part that I was missing. Yeah, the razor part.
Yep.
I'm
It's
satisfied.
pretty straightforward. I can send you or get you, or when we kind of maybe shift topics for a second and I'm not in the spotlight, I have actually for myself a little mini token that makes it easy to loop over something. And I can show you with it. It's a for each basically in Razor. It's
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I do this often.
certainly, I'll pull it up here. I have it
Thank
handy.
you. I don't mean to monopolize the meeting. You guys go ahead and talk about something else.
Well, this is, you always say that, but you bring good topics up.
I'm working with it all day long, every day.
Going back to your previous question about the seeing the pagination in the URL for grids, I just want to clarify that the sync with URL setting is that not accomplishing what you want, or are you not aware of that? Or I just want to clarify that.
I do know how to use it. If you're talking
Okay,
about,
but it's not doing what you want.
understand it, but when I oftentimes only need like 3 rows, and I don't need the pagination at all. So I want to turn it off. And when I do turn it off, I want that out of the URL.
Yeah, so that's what the sync with URL. If you turn off the sync with URL, it should you shouldn't see that in the URL anymore.
I don't think that's true, Patrick.
Really? Okay, I did test it before I went and said so.
Did you?
Dale, you want to give it a try on your end just to see if you go to
I know I've tried that multiple times because I'm pretty annoyed with that. maybe that was 1 or 2 versions back. Maybe you guys did something.
Just go to any page with a grid on it. Doesn't really matter.
That would actually be everything that I was asking for right there.
So we have the page up there, and then go to the settings of the thing. And then under the, it's a little bit, a little bit lower than that. Yeah, that one right there.
Oh no. I'm sorry. What I tested was trying to change the settings on the pagination, trying to tell it that I didn't want it. But I oftentimes still, that's a weird thing. I oftentimes do need it to sync with the URL, but I don't want pagination. So it's the combination of those 2 things.
Right, because you need it to sync with the URL because you're using filtering, for example.
Yeah. I do need to sync with URL often, but I often don't need the pagination.
I see. Yeah, so if we were able to
Split those out.
make choices about what we are syncing with URL, that would be a great improvement, definitely.
Little checkbox, pagination on or off. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. You helped me clear that up in my mind, what the combination of events was for me.
Okay, Patrick just confused me. I thought I understood what sync URL was doing, but now he just showed its magic piece. So,
Hey, thanks, Fraser.
so sync URL, it's still paginating, but it's that sync URL, those are just off those page and size are off the.
I think the purpose of the sync with URL, Reza, clarify if you think something differently, but I think the purpose is so that you can create links that go directly to what you want somebody to see. Like if I want somebody to see page 2 of these results, and I have that link
without needing to refresh the page. It's
a
JavaScript client side refresh, search, any of that sort of stuff. And it causes the grid to go look up inside the URL. And if anything changes in there, it'll trigger. I've seen people like Radu on the team will do little tricks where he's even got JavaScript that will push something up into the URL.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as he does, it causes the grid to change. So you might have a tile. We use it with the KPI tiles, for example. And he does a thing that says, when I click on this tile, like tickets that are in critical status, that was a help desk thing. He pushes status equals critical up into the URL. And then since he has sync with URL on and filter on, for example, on one of the columns, it'll cause it to filter just like that. So, so yes, if you landed in on the page from a different page, it'll it'll build everything out like it's done. And you hopefully, usually, as long as it's not a huge grid, it'll happen so fast you don't notice. Then it filters it down. But you've not filtered the data source itself. All the data is there. It just gives you a way to target a set of records when you land. But it also will do it when you're just on the page. You know, that's really what's happening when you hit pagination. You say next, you'll notice your URL changes, and
Right.
makes the grid watch the URL.
So if you turn that off, you're removing the pagination because it no longer has that reference in the URL to move forward. That, you know, so it wasn't that you were just hiding it there when you turn that off and stuff. If you would have you'd have no page number of how to page it.
Right.
If you turn that off. Okay. All right. It wasn't the magic I thought Patrick was giving us.
I'm sorry.
And what would be really cool is if you could sync with something else other than the URL, like sync with a cookie or sync with a local variable. And it wouldn't be visible up there, but it could still be syncing. I have no idea if that could work or not.
So, you know, just in playing here, I go back to Patrick's use case too, sync with URL. I mean, when you do filtering, the filtering goes up there. If you're doing searching, the search goes up there. So it allows the flexibility of using the grid in any number of ways, using it as a you know, a direct link from somewhere else with things pre-built. And I know I've certainly done that before, where I build a search into a link. So being able to sync.
Might be able to do something with just thought. I'm definitely not a developer, but just enough to be dangerous or get snowed or not snowed by developers. But I think, you know, if we were going to try to use like a cookie or session variables, those are sometimes they're server side. And so, you know, we're trying to not cause a reload of the page before it updates the values, but we might be able to have some kind of like hidden client side variables, JavaScript variables or something that are being talked to instead of the URL.
Interesting.
And aside from the URL getting quite extensive, I mean, what's the downside of where it's going into the URL?
Hey, Sam.
It just,
You talking to me, Dale?
well, yeah, I'm just talking.
How are you doing? Thank you.
All right, somebody find mute.
Might have stepped away.
And of course, if you get a complex application, maybe several grids on a page or within a tab, and now you've got multiple things going on, the URL gets quite long.
Yeah, I have personally seen where if the URL gets too long, it will break things. It's bigger than is you know, whatever the standard is for browsers or whatever it is, and you will not be able to access. It'll just truncate it, and then you are, you know. So if you're in a situation where you also are passing things up into the URL along the way as a mechanism for filtering or whatever, these can mess up. Also, that it wants to append or prepend, and so it starts messing with the URL. So when you've got your parameters mixed in with the ones that are being injected, it can get a little weird or funny with the ordering of them, the readability, that kind of stuff. And I guess, you know, it depends on the app, right? But from a security standpoint, a little bit, you are exposing the inner workings, right? Someone can start noticing that and playing around with the query
That's
string
precisely
parameter.
what I don't want. I don't want people seeing my IDs flashing past, and I want to say, "Oh, that was number one. Well, I might be number. What can I change if I do 2?"
Yep.
I don't want them to even notice that it's going on.
I did post in to the chat here the example of what would go in a razor, and we can, Dale, if you want to maybe pull up the chat from this Zoom up, I can explain how it works.
that one?
It might be on a different screen.
In the chat.
Still seeing your browser at the moment.
So Zoom, when you're sharing a screen, won't actually let you show any Zoom windows. Yeah.
Little,
Yep, give me just a second. I'll open here.
a notepad or something, yeah. So at its simplest form, this is all you need to do. It's the @ for each. And then when you say var, and then you get to make up this part, right? So the answer detail in assessment answer details. It was some assessment thing I built that I pulled this one from real quick. The second part, assessment answer details, that's your token name, right? Or that's the database token that you're wanting to loop over, right? The first part, the var, it's whatever you want to call it. I could have called it foo, x. I usually tend to use something that is similar. And once you name it, that's how you access the values. So I had like an ID and a question ID, and I wanted to, for example, I trimmed out a lot of stuff, but below setting these variables, then I can use AID, QID. You know, I basically said, go get me these IDs, and I want to loop over all of the assessment questions, right? And the answers in this case, and set some JavaScript variable or Razor variable to this, so I can use it to whatever later, right? But essentially, this is how you loop them. So assessment answer details is actually my token, database token. And then the variable is whatever I want it to be, whatever I want to call the thing, dealer's choice. And then, but why it's important is that when you go to actually, so forget that two-string stuff, just answer detail dot ID is going to give me, for whatever iteration of the loop I'm in, the ID of the record. And then like question ID happened to be something else that was in my data set, so I can access that. Now, in this case, I was trying to turn it to a string. I was having some issues, you know, I don't know if you ever get into the Razor, but it gets really weird about comparing numbers to text and stuff. So I just said, hey, I'm going to turn everything to text. Now I can compare them easily or do stuff with them, right? That's what I was doing here, why I set those variables. But you could be writing it out to the screen, for example, if you're like we were kind of going back to the original list of names, you can actually just write HTML out within this loop. And it will, so you can kind of, and you would maybe have some HTML, let's say it was a list, an unordered list. I would have something that's HTML above the for each that would say UL tag, open the UL tag. Now loop and do LIs, right, for each name, for example. And then once that loop is done, completely out of the brackets, I would close my /UL. The net result of that token then is going to be HTML that is an unordered list with list items for each record in my database token.
That's great. That's great. I like that. And I'm sure I'm going to be doing that as a workflow as well when that's available as a token.
Yeah. And you know, that was one of the cases I made on Wednesday, is that there is a time and place, and Razor editor syntax or JavaScript, which you can do from workflows, for example. But you know, in that little simple setting, the inject data, there's only so much HTML that's not really a code editor. Now I was just doing breaks, or if you're just doing simple tags, no problemo. If you get into some kind of advanced situations, it still will probably be better. Even in a workflow, you can then use the workflow to loop, but you're still going to want to kind of use maybe a code editor to build up, you know, big payload of HTML, for example.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot.
I'm going to try and internalize.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to make a comment that I just shared an image that I did for one of our clients to kind of help her understand the iteration in a Razor script, and it might help. I don't know. So check it out and see if that's useful for you.
You shared it where, Patrick?
In the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really good, actually, Patrick.
Oh, cool.
That's everything I was trying to say in a picture. 1,000 words, literally.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still trying to open it. Oh, there it goes. Here we go.
Yeah, so basically the processes.process contacts is her existing database token. So on line 4, that's her existing database token that she had in there, and I was showing her how she could iterate through the values coming from that database token, and all she has to do for this Razor script is pass in the ID of the record she wants to, of the record she wants to get values for, and then she declares a local variable. The contact is local variable to get the values from that database token. And then there's a lot more that she was going to get from there, but I just was giving her an example of name and email. And so the contact name is in an H3 header, and then the email is in a paragraph, but then she could continue on to get the first name, last name, etc., whatever she needed. And what she was doing was just building a list of contacts to display on a page.
Yeah, and that's a great example too of like kind of going back to the original thing, which is if you've almost got loop inception going on, right? I'm looping for the grid, I'm looping over my data source, each one's a row, but before I move on to the next row, call this token and pass in the ID of the record I'm on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then that token is going to go do its own loop because it's contacts that are tied to this,
Yeah, and I'm sorry, you're right, Reza. That's the one detail I left out, is that the reason she's passing in the process ID is that her contacts are associated with a specific process in her system. And so she needs to get the contacts that are for the process ID that she's passing in and then display them on a page. And that's what this accomplishes for her.
So this is the database token, and this syntax
right. Instead of
that's
I can't even think of the normal token syntax now.
Yeah,
that's funny, but yes.
Yeah. And then this is a great illustration of bringing in a process ID, bringing in a token params that you're going to consume in the Razor script as well. So, okay, I'm going to have to.
One other real quick pro tip while we're on this one, just real quick, is that FYI, if you're trying to do this with the Razor and stuff, sometimes, especially when you're wanting to write things out, like you're generating HTML and stuff, when you're in Razor, it gets a little weird where it's trying to figure out, are you trying to write C# here, or are you just trying to write out text? And if you use the equivalent of HTML tags of text, so just bracket, text, bracket, and then whatever your actual text is, and then you close that, it causes the Razor and the engine to not try to apply C#. It goes, what you're doing in here isn't C#. Go ahead and just write it out to the screen. So sometimes it might throw a little error or fuss at you. Just put those text tags around what you're trying to write out, and that solves it.
And when you're saying text, are you saying like this?
Yep, and then you would hit exactly that. And then, so while you're in that loop or whatever, you can be putting out whatever, but it tells it that it would even technically, and it's a tag, HTML tag, that the browser ignores, right? The browser is not going, even though it's there on the screen, if you inspected the source, the browser doesn't do anything with it. It's just kind of a way to, HTML back in the day was really about marking up and describing to the browser what type of content this is. Now, over the years, it became kind of the de facto to manipulate and work with and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's just a way to signal to the browser, this is just text, this is a paragraph, this is a heading, right? So it's just saying this is just text, and C# interprets and knows to not try to fuss at you for your H1 tags and brackets, wait a minute, this isn't valid C# or something. It knows, this is just text treated as such. It'll still render your @ variables, but it won't fuss about other text and things that you have in there if they're conflicting with something that's also in C# and Razor.
That's a good tip, President.
And is this syntax look about right? Where if I wanted to expand the things that we extracted up above?
Yeah, that's it, exactly.
Great. So by the time this episode gets aired, I'll have actually worked through an example, and maybe I'll post it as a low-code feature focus or something, or at least add some notes to this for the folks that follow along behind.
So I'm seeing something I'm doing differently, and I maybe don't have to, which is in that token there, I'm building up a string and then writing the string back with all the HTML And is that HTML going out to the browser on each iteration of the loop? So I don't have to build the interim string to write back out?
Yep, you're correct. The only time I've had to build a string a little bit is when, let's say you're writing HTML for an anchor, hyperlink, right? And it's going to say like or an image, and you're saying the source path to the image is this. Because there's double quotes, it causes it to ignore the razor. And so I will build it up as a regular variable and say, here's going to be my full path to whatever. It's like, it's part of the URL, mysite.com / and then it's going to be the dynamic part. And it's like, @ whatever. I will take that whole thing and just plug it into kind of like what I'm doing with that toString there. Now I've got AID. You could call it picture path. Now I just put picture path in @picture path inside of my source for my image, and it renders. It doesn't like double quotes and you mixing regular text inside of double quotes with it treats it's either saying, look, I'm either rendering a variable or I'm rendering text. If you got the mix, you should try to build up a little string, but that's just for like a field that goes inside your HTML. Normally, yeah, you don't have to build up some big string. You can just write plain old HTML out in here, and then that's what the result of the token will be.
Okay.
It would seem to me on stuff like that that using the workflow as a token is going to be much more straightforward. It seems a lot more understandable.
You talk about time sinks. I have very mixed feelings. I'm even sitting here right now going, man, yeah, by the way, guys, this Razor C# stuff, hugely powerful, right? And you don't have to be like really a full-blown developer or anything. Just like you were saying, Google Foo, there's great examples. Most of the time, what are we doing? We need loops, we need ifs. That's the maybe some comparisons of values, right? Other than that, like all that other code, even though you could use it, you don't need it. So don't be intimidated by it. But I will say it's very, very picky and finicky about semicolons and syntax, and it's case sensitive and all this stuff. So it's something that's one of those takes a minute to get going and a lifetime to master type things, and you can avoid all of that with the workflows.
But there's some things that you can do that, being able to reference external DLLs. So for example, I got into a thing early on where we're trying to convert from JSON to XML, and there wasn't an action for it. And all that's available through a DLL that you can just get .NET to do the work for you, but you have to exit. That wouldn't have an equivalent in workflows, is that correct?
Nowadays, what I would do in a workflow, but it's still going to be quote unquote code, just feels like a little more accessible code. You can run the JavaScript action server side, and tons more forgiving and a lot more examples, I feel like, with JavaScript than because technically we keep saying, I keep interchanging Razor and C#, but Razor is a flavor of C# that's meant for the browser and stuff. It's not a verbatim C#. So you'll find tons of great C# examples, but some of them don't work in Razor. Razor is its own thing. You should Google Razor C# separately, or Razor VB, which technically is one of the languages you could pick. C# just has way more examples and stuff, but you could do it inside of a workflow with a JavaScript action, and JavaScript does have that converting, parsing, other things out there, right?
Yep.
But then going to what you're saying, Dale, like someone gave me Ben Santiago, actually. He has a couple of really, really neat that I wanted to share out with people, where he's included some DLLs, and he's got a situation where people are uploading images to him, but those images, one, are really, really big. And a lot of times your end users don't know how to shrink down pictures so they're not 12 megabytes like it was taken off their phone. And also, in his case, he's got to protect some sensitive data about these pictures. And in any picture you're taking on pretty much any modern device, there's all this metadata about here's the coordinates, latitude, longitude of where the picture was taken, what type of device, all this kind of stuff, date and time. And he's stripping all that off, so you couldn't look at the picture and figure out, where was this, who was this, type of thing. And he did that by including a couple of DLLs that are for working with images and manipulating them. So it's kind of plug and chug if you all wanted to try to use this thing, where you put it in and You give it a path to an image, and it's going to loop over and shrink it down while not losing quality and strip all that metadata off and stuff. That was all accomplished with, not that he wrote so much fancy Razor, but there's DLL libraries out there that you include in on your token, and it unlocks the power of whatever that DLL, that library is for. In this case, image manipulation, but there's tons of them out there.
Yeah, I've done that exact same use case. Not the stripping, but the image resizing, wanting to have a standard size or at least a standard width, let's say, of an image, and built it with some .NET code. But then this is in pre-working for PlantinApp, I didn't understand Razor and that was the right spot for Razor. So I did a complete hack to get my DLL to run and work on these things. I called it through an ASP, like through a server call. Well, understanding that's the bad part. When you got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I knew I could make it work, and I did. But the Razor is the right answer. So just going back, workflow. There really isn't a way to incorporate an external DLL. Is that true?
The short answer is you're correct, no. However, there is an execute token action. And so you could have a token that has that DLL, does some stuff, and you can, while within the workflow, still even run a token, a Razor token, getting its value back, whatever.
Yeah. I'm just saying, if somebody comes in with a project tomorrow that has a custom DLL, and we're never going to incorporate it into the product, but they need to be able to run that DLL and do the thing, whatever the magic is that's behind it, then there is a way to get there, but it's not directly within workflow.
Yeah, it's still to do a token and then execute a token action in the workflow for that step of it, right? Now, if that's all you were doing, I would say just use a Razor token, right? No need for potentially no need for the workflow. Workflows give us some other stuff, easier access to defining parameters, input and outputs, to test the thing and stuff like that. So I can't say that if you just got one action, don't use a workflow, but generally, if that's all you were doing was that, maybe that's it. But if that's one step in a process, put it in the workflow.
And that's certainly what I'm finding, that doing them in a workflow makes it very easy to test. There's also the ability to expand, right? Your original use is, hey, I want to retrieve this piece of information from a database, and so you're going to use a workflow to do that. But let's say you now have a requirement that you have to log every time that information gets accessed. Well, you can just insert more steps into your workflow. The maintainability and testing is just.
Yeah, and you get some better error handling, right? If this Razor fails, for example, big old complex Razor script fails, it just failed, and you're going to get some error back that the token didn't work. But in a workflow, and kind of one of the things that's also coming in 1.15, we've added more on error actions to other things, right? And so you have the ability to carry on, or to at least log things or take a different action, that is, it's much more forgiving.
I think we lost Reza. Mark, you still there, right? I see you moving.
Yep, Reza froze up.
All right. So I'm trying to find my way back to my Campfire, but I didn't have any other slides that were really of relevance. What else do we have going on today? Anything else that we need to take up, or a topic that we can bring in for another day?
So I do have one question for everyone here, and potentially for next week as well. I wanted to learn and hear more about people's experience as they're moving from any of the DNN Sharp modules to PlantinApp. I just want to hear about the pros and cons of it, what your experience was, what was easier, what was different about it, what stuff did you have to change in your development cycle, basically anything and everything, just to to get more info on that whole process as you made that transition.
I've got some thoughts on that, Chad. I can help you out.
Awesome. I'll definitely reach out, Mark. But yeah, if anybody else has any information, or if you want to reach out to me, for those who are watching afterwards, reach out to chad.weiss at plantanap.io. So that's chad.weiss at plantanap.io. And that's my direct email. And we'll connect. And I'd love to hear your story, what you've been through, how you're getting on, and any struggles or any achievements and stuff that you've made along the way.
Yeah. I recall my transition, because I used the DNN Sharp tools for 5 years or so before PlantanApp became available, and there is a little bit of a mind shift, but it'd be interesting to kind of gather that and to see what others' experiences are. So anybody watching that, and we will set aside some time next week to kind of talk about what those experiences are. If you want to jot down 2 or 3 things, or any thoughts you might have on that, that'd be great. Okay, Reza, you trailed off on us. I see you're back.
Yeah, I could hear you all the whole time. I guess just the 2-second thing I was saying was that in a Razor, if any one of those things fails or has an error, the token just fails and you're kind of dead. In a workflow, we have, especially in 15, we've introduced a bunch of additional on errors to the actions. And you can trap and degrade more gracefully, or take an alternate path if something didn't work, versus if it's all just in code. One failure and the whole thing stops and you don't know where or why, short of trying to troubleshoot code.
Yep. Okay, so everyone use those, submit questions. So if you have feedback for Chad, that'll be great. And I'm just admitting, I haven't had a chance to watch the Low Code Cafe from this week, so I'm going to catch up on that and see what was presented. But
Before we go, I have a generic question.
oh yeah.
Mark was using a lot of examples of JavaScript stuff that he writes and stuff. Is there a good place to hook, if you've got a little JavaScript library or something that you built or you're using, where's the right place to hook that in so it's available on every page, so you don't have to go put it on every page that you're using?
Couple ideas there. I'll kick it off. One is that you could put it in a token, and then have like a form or an HTML module that you include on those pages, as a bunch, but not everyone. And it'll render that way. You could put JavaScript into the page settings under SEO. There's a header, I think it's called, that's meant for tags, that is like for browsers to say, this is keywords and stuff like that, but it'll run JavaScript. And then there is another module that's in add-ons. It's called Redirect Toolkit. And I found that one to be quite handy. It can run on every page. You have conditions that say, should this thing run or not? It's almost like what you get in a form, but it's really scoped and targeted as take a look at what's going on the page, and based on these situation, do this. And one of those things is to like run the token, for example, which would include the JavaScript.
Okay. No, because I've been using the module and including it.
Yeah, check out page settings, Dale. It'd be under pages, and just go to any page is settings. Like home page will work.
Right, but he would have to go page to page to put that in. I think.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. If you wanted to put it, it's in that page header tags there. You can put JavaScript in here, right? Can't put tokens in here, but you can put JavaScript in here. Otherwise, you need to include some sort of a module on the page. Now, here's the thing, though. You can't put JavaScript inside an HTML module vanilla. I think it's like a security thing, and DNN strips it, right? And so you would need to use like action form, or this redirect toolkit. And then you can say, hey, put this module, there's a setting on the modules where you say run it on every page. And by default, it'll put it there, and you can delete it off the ones you don't want. Or you can just include a reference to that module, right? When you do it, don't make a copy of it, but do a reference to it. And then you have one place to maintain it, but you can pick the pages if there's a bunch of them. So you're not one by one going here and doing it.
Right.
But you might, yeah.
Yeah, no, because in my ASP.NET pages, I would do an include in like a master page, and just I have a little script, and it's like, okay, where is the right place in DNN to hook that? That in?
Rissa, how do you put JavaScript in a token?
Just a static token, for example, will
Static?
take,
Okay.
yeah.
Including the script tags?
Yep. Yeah, just think of it as like a variable. Whenever this token is used, I want whatever is inside of it to show. And so usually you're going to want the script tags.
Yes, back when I did Pusher, I did it exactly that way inside of tokens.
I've been putting an action form on every page, and the only thing in it is the static text box, and my JavaScript's in there. So it doesn't show, it just runs.
Okay, well, that's our hour. So thanks all for sharing all that you've done, and we will check back with you next week. We'll be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good conversation.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you guys.
Likewise.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Likewise.